Amidst the luxurious and treacherous shadows of the Palace of Versailles, Geneviève de Montclair receives an unexpected invitation from the king. But why? 3 years ago, she left behind not only the royal court but also her honor and a heart broken by unexplained intrigues. Now, summoned once again, she must navigate false smiles and dangerous secrets to uncover who betrayed her. By her side appears Lucien, a mysterious ally with dark, captivating eyes, whose loyalty could become her salvation or her undoing. Between masks, forbidden dances, and conspiracies, just how far can someone go for love and justice? Are you ready to unravel the secrets hidden within the heart of France's most dangerous court? Tell us in the comments where you're listening from, and what makes a historical romance irresistible to you. France, 1771. The gardens of Château de Montclair, nestled among the emerald hills of the Loire Valley, still slept beneath the soft veils of morning mist when fate knocked on the Duchess's door. Geneviève de Montclair, draped in deep plum tones, stood motionless before the window of the reading room. A chill breeze stirred the fine linen curtains, and the pale spring sunlight cast a soft glow over her serene profile, almost as if sculpted from marble. Her gray eyes, once alight with promises and hope, now reflected only calm, born not of peace but of caution. She watched once more the damp leaves of the oak tree beneath which her late husband had been buried, without public tears, without official mourning, only silence. The world had moved on, she had not. It was then that Grimaud, the old butler, stoic and inscrutable as the stones that held the chateau together, announced in a low, steady voice, "Your Grace, a message from Versailles has arrived." Resting on the silver tray was an envelope sealed with the royal insignia, the son of Louis XV, as golden as it was merciless. Geneviève did not touch the paper immediately. She simply stared at it as if she might decipher its contents with her gaze alone. Beside her, Colette, her loyal maid and childhood companion, shivered slightly. "They're going to tear us from here, aren't they?" she whispered, her voice a mix of fear and instinct. Geneviève broke the seal with the tip of a dagger adorned with a mother-of-pearl hilt. Her fingers were steady. Her eyes, however, flickered for a brief instant, a spark of something even she would not dare to name. "Her Grace's presence is requested at the spring reception ball, in honor of the English and Spanish envoys, at the Palace of Versailles. The King's own signature." Silence. Geneviève drew a deep breath. The scent of the paper, steeped in wax and power, flooded her senses. She had not stepped foot in Versailles since Antoine's funeral 3 years prior. 3 long years of averted eyes, hushed voices in the corridors, and nights when only the crackling fireplace dared answer her questions. "They want to see me," she murmured. "They want to measure me." "And perhaps silence you," Colette added, already fluent in the court's cruel logic. Grimaud remained impassive, though his eyes narrowed slightly. The message had been delivered, the warning understood. Geneviève rose with the grace of one who had known the weight of humiliation and still remained standing. Her gown trailed gently across the embroidered carpet, and her steps echoed down the gallery like the opening notes of an unscored symphony. In her mind, she recalled faces she preferred to forget, the syrupy voices of courtiers, invitations laced with hidden intentions, the suffocating heat of salons where destinies were spun with a smile and a glass of wine. Versailles. The stage of her triumphs and her fall. "Shall we prepare your journey?" Colette ventured. The Duchess simply nodded. Hours later, the news spread through the chateau's cold stone walls like the wind before a storm. Geneviève de Montclair would return to court. But there, amid tapestries embroidered with mythological scenes and the lingering scent of winter roses, no one could have foreseen that this seemingly simple invitation would unravel the veil of secrets that had long shrouded France. Nor that fate would come to meet her, bearing the title of Duke and the accent of a foreign land. That spring night, the Palace of Versailles seemed plucked from a golden dream. The splendor of the Hall of Mirrors shimmered beneath the light of hundreds of chandeliers, their flickering flames casting mysterious shadows across masked faces. The marble floor mirrored the dancers' subtle movements, while the walls, draped in luxurious tapestries, muffled the constant murmur of whispered intrigues and veiled promises. Geneviève de Montclair entered the ballroom with the composure of a queen without a throne, wrapped in a silver silk gown that rippled with every step, as if it carried in its folds the weight of countless secrets. Her lace mask, adorned with tiny pearls, partially veiled her face, revealing just enough to spark the imagination of all who beheld her. No announcement marked her arrival, and yet a wave of whispers spread through the hall like a sudden chill. Everyone knew who she was, the solitary lady crossing the space between marble columns and ornate fountains, moving with the grace of one who bore the memory of ancient glories on her shoulders. Madeleine de Brissac, strategically stationed beside a gold-leafed pillar, watched Genevieve's every move. The young woman, dressed in sky blue, fanned herself with a delicate air of feigned indifference. Though her sharp eyes missed nothing, Madeleine knew that beneath the glittering surface of that night, a dangerous undercurrent of interests and intentions flowed, and that Genevieve's return to court was no whim of fate, but a carefully positioned piece in a game of power. As Genevieve crossed the ballroom, she felt the weight of countless eyes upon her. Men and women sized her up, speculated, judged. Yet it was one gaze in particular that captured her entirely. Near the grand staircase, beside a statue of Apollo, a man dressed in dark attire and wearing a simple black velvet mask watched her with such intensity that it nearly stole her breath. It was as if this stranger knew something the rest of the world did not, something about her. Without fully understanding how or why, Genevieve allowed her steps to carry her toward him. The music shifted to a softer, more inviting rhythm, and observing the unspoken etiquette of such gatherings, he gave a slight bow and offered his gloved hand. For a moment that felt eternal, she hesitated, her heart pounding beneath the tight confines of her corset. Then, with the elegance of a woman well versed in taming inner storms, she extended the tips of her fingers. His hand was steady, sure, and when their eyes met, it was as if time faltered in the ballroom, as if the vast universe had collapsed into that brief electric moment. "Some stars," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "shine brightest when they believe the sky has forgotten them." Genevieve raised an eyebrow beneath her mask, intrigued and slightly disarmed by the poetic boldness of his remark. "And some," she replied, gliding with him across the floor, "burn out so quickly that all they leave behind is darkness." The smile that curved the stranger's lips was fleeting, yet devastating. There was a quiet sorrow in it, a flame carefully contained behind a polished facade. As they danced, moving with an almost instinctive harmony, Genevieve felt herself enveloped not only by the music, but by something heavier, more dangerous. Each phrase they exchanged was another thread in the invisible web drawing them closer. Each glance, a blade slicing through the polite distance imposed by society. From her post, Madeleine narrowed her eyes, pressing the fan against her chest. She didn't recognize the man, which in Versailles was a danger in itself. In court, knowing everyone's name wasn't just etiquette, it was survival. The young lady began to move discreetly through the guests, trying to gather more information, but the mystery only deepened. Across the ballroom, the Marquis de Villiers watched the dance with a cold smile. His impeccably composed face revealed nothing of the jealousy that burned in his veins. Genevieve, the same woman he had once tried to bend to his will, now spun in the arms of a stranger, caught in a kind of intimacy he had never managed to command. Villiers snatched a glass of wine from a servant's tray and squeezed it so tightly that the slender crystal stem cracked between his fingers. Unbothered by the cut, he walked slowly toward the heart of the ballroom, like a predator drawn to the scent of prey. Meanwhile, Genevieve's conversation with her masked partner continued, every word laced with dangerous double meaning. "There seem to be many eyes upon us tonight," she remarked, letting her free hand trail across the brocade of his sleeve. "In Versailles," the man replied with an enigmatic smile, "even the walls listen and the mirrors whisper." Genevieve tilted her head slightly, as if enjoying the game, but deep in her mind, suspicion began to take root. Who was this man capable of matching her wit and awakening emotions she had long believed buried? When the dance ended, Lucian, though his name remained unrevealed, bowed to kiss her hand, his lips lingering a heartbeat longer than propriety allowed. The warmth of that subtle gesture swept over Genevieve's skin like a silent flame. She withdrew her hand with the slow, measured grace of a woman who knew precisely the effect she had, but who refused to yield. Before she could question him, a commotion at the edges of the hall caught everyone's attention. It was the official announcement of the Spanish delegation's arrival. The already charged atmosphere turned nearly suffocating. Lucian bowed once more and murmured, "Until we meet again, my forgotten star." And with the same discretion with which he had appeared, he vanished into the masked crowd, leaving Genevieve alone at the center of the ballroom, breathless, unsettled, and aware she had just stepped into a game whose rules she had yet to learn. As the hall resumed its frenzied rhythm, Genevieve turned to find Grimaud watching her from afar, half concealed in the shadow of a marble column. The old butler's eyes were narrowed, fixed on the path the stranger had taken. It was a gaze heavy with distrust, a silent warning. Meeting his eyes, Genevieve understood. She wasn't the only one who sensed the danger. There beneath the cold gleam of Versailles mirrors, an invisible thread had begun to unspool, intertwining fates and sealing unspoken promises, and none of them, neither Genevieve nor Lucien, nor even the ever-watchful Grimaud, could yet foresee where that thread would lead. The afternoon settled lazily and golden over the slate rooftops and polished stone streets of Paris. In the heart of the city, nestled among elegant alleys and whispering private gardens, the residence of the Marquise de Brissac stirred with meticulous preparations. The young Madeleine, hostess of the evening, personally oversaw every detail of the main hall, where the scent of fresh flowers mingled with the sweet perfume of melting wax from the chandeliers. It was a gathering carefully orchestrated under the guise of a literary salon. Though only the most discerning could glimpse its true purpose, behind deep blue velvet curtains and tapestries embroidered with mythological scenes, the evening welcomed not only nobles in search of distraction, but also souls hungry for information, power, and revenge. Genevieve de Montclair arrived precisely on time, wearing a gown of deep wine-colored silk adorned only with delicate hand-stitched pearls. She carried the calm of someone who knows how to conceal tempest behind a gentle smile. Colette, her faithful shadow, followed at a respectful distance, her eyes alert, silent as a sentinel. Madeleine received the Duchess with a bow full of genuine warmth, but also with the unease of someone who understood the invisible weight Genevieve carried. In the shaded corridors of Paris, the name Montclair had begun to circulate again, sometimes with reverence, other times as a warning. At the center of the hall, Benoit, a young man with tousled hair and a feverish gaze, read aloud from a volume of poetry, his voice measured like a distant drum. His words floated through the air, layered with double meanings. Not all that glitters is gold, not every lie casts a shadow, sometimes truth wears the mask of silence. The phrases hovered, infusing the space with a strange magnetism. Charlotte de Brissac, her golden hair pinned into a bun laced with blue ribbons, sighed dreamily with each new line. Her wide, luminous eyes remained fixed on Benoit with the naive devotion of someone who still believes that love and poetry are made of the same stuff. Genevieve, however, remained untouched by the charm of the verses or the sweetness of the scene. Deep within her, suspicion flickered like a candle in a dark room. Something about that evening went beyond simple literary pleasure. The guest list, the secluded setting, the glances exchanged under false pretenses, it all pointed to something more dangerous lurking beneath the surface. While Benoit continued reading, Colette, moved by an inexplicable unease, quietly slipped away to the adjoining library. She searched for a book, any book, to momentarily escape the charged atmosphere of the salon. Her fingers glided over worn spines until, pulling down a volume of Spanish tales, something small and folded fell at her feet. It was a note, hastily written in a slanted, almost frantic hand. After a quick glance to ensure she was alone, Colette opened it with trembling fingers. The message, though brief, cut like a blade. Midnight, at Diana's fountain, the fate of France will be sealed. Her blood ran cold. Unsure of what to do, she tucked the note into the folds of her dress and returned to the salon, her heart pounding. Inside, Genevieve engaged in pleasant conversation with a small circle of acquaintances, though her thoughts remained fixed on the man from the ball, the Duke with the foreign accent and the mysterious voice. Who was he really? What purpose had brought him to court? The coincidences were too perilous to ignore. When Benoit concluded his reading to polite applause, Madeleine gently divided the guests into smaller groups for conversation. Colette approached Genevieve discreetly, and without a word, slipped the note into her hand. The Duchess, a master at masking emotion, smiled and nodded as if thanking her for a passing comment while her eyes quickly absorbed the message. The weight of the discovery pressed down on her. Each word sparked new doubts. What was being plotted beneath the guise of diplomatic banquets and spring celebrations? And what was Lucien Ashford's true role in this tapestry of intrigue? Sensing a subtle tension in Genevieve, Madeleine approached with 2 glasses of red wine. "Sometimes, my dear," she said, offering her one, "the game reveals more than the truth. Versailles is a stage where everyone wears masks, but it's behind the curtains where the real stories are written." Genevieve smiled and took the glass, but her thoughts were far away. In her heart, she felt herself being pulled into a whirlpool of forces she could not yet name, but which had already begun to shape her fate. As the afternoon faded into night and the first stars timidly appeared in the Parisian sky, a quiet sense of anticipation settled over the marquise's salon. Laughter grew louder, conversations quickened, as if all present sensed without admitting it, that this peace was merely the prelude to something far greater and more dangerous. Charlotte, blissfully unaware, remained captivated by Benoit, who spoke of distant lands and revolutionary dreams with such passion that her eyes sparkled. But she did not see that each of his words was carefully chosen, each smile a lure cast in a game far beyond her grasp. Genevieve, leaning lightly against the back of an armchair, watched it all with a gaze that seemed to cut through masks and pretenses. She felt like a skilled player at a table where the cards had not yet been revealed, though the scent of betrayal already hung in the air. That night, as the servants gathered empty glasses and the candles melted into golden pools, a silent pact formed between Genevieve and her own instincts. She would not be led blindly again. She would not allow herself to become someone else's pawn. Lucian Ashford, the Duke with the mysterious voice. He was the key. And she, more than ever, knew she had to find the lock before it was too late. Outside, beneath the growing chill of the Parisian night, the city held its breath, and within Madeleine's salon, where smiles and sweet words masked darker intentions, the true masquerade had only just begun. Night had poured over Versailles like a heavy mantle, soaked in deep shadows and a damp breeze. The last lights of the main ballroom were dimming slowly, like stars succumbing to weariness, and the sounds of laughter and music had become faint echoes lost in the vast emptiness of the gilded corridors. Genevieve de Montclair walked silently through the winter garden, wrapped in a gray velvet shawl that shielded her shoulders from the chill rising from the stone floor. With each step, the soft rustle of her silk gown mingled with the whisper of leaves stirred by the night wind. Pale moonlight filtered through the tall glass windows, casting the silhouettes of exotic plants onto the white marble, as if the garden itself were conspiring in secret. Her heart, once so disciplined, now beat with a restless rhythm she couldn't explain. She didn't know what had brought her to that forgotten corner at such a late hour. Perhaps it was the need to breathe, far from the suffocating falsehoods of the ballroom. Or maybe it was something deeper, a silent instinct calling her name. As she turned to admire the moonlit elegance of a golden palm, a shadow broke away from the columns and took form before her. Lucian Ashford. There was no need for introduction. Something in his presence, in his stillness, almost predatory, betrayed his identity before he spoke a word. Genevieve instinctively took a step back, her heart pounding, but she concealed her surprise with the practiced grace of a woman who had learned to survive the jungle of the court. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and met his gaze with a cold stare. Lucian inclined his head in a gesture that hovered between courtesy and defiance, though his eyes burned with an intensity that made the air between them hum. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice deep and taut like a drawn bowstring, "but there was no other way to reach you without raising suspicion." Genevieve said nothing, her hands clasped firmly before her, as if only sheer will kept her from being swept into the storm she felt approaching. Lucian stepped closer, claiming the space between them with the ease of someone who knew his presence had weight. There was something about him that exceeded the role of a diplomat, something wild, forged in the fire of experiences most wouldn't dare imagine. "I need your help," he said, each word heavy, like an invisible chain dropped between them. Genevieve arched an eyebrow, her voice icy. "I'm not fond of secret games, monsieur." A faint, melancholic smile tugged at Lucian's lips. "And yet you play them better than most I've known." The compliment, veiled in irony, didn't flatter her. She stood perfectly still, though inside, something stirred like a sea threatening to breach its banks. Lucian stepped even closer, until Genevieve could feel the faint warmth radiating from his body. Her breath caught, and her eyes locked with his in a silent clash of wills. "There is a meeting tonight," he murmured, his voice low enough for her ears only. "Arranged by Villiers. A conspiracy, I believe, that could alter the fate of France. I need information that only someone trusted by the court can obtain." Genevieve let out a short, joyless laugh. "And you imagine that I, of all people, would risk what little honor I have left to serve your foreign intrigues?" Lucian leaned in, his face just inches from hers. The tension between them was electric, charged like the air before a storm. "It's not my honor at stake," he said, and his sincerity slipped past her defenses like a blade. "It's the survival of everything we still hold sacred in this land. For a moment, silence settled between them like a third presence. Genevieve felt the weight of his words reverberate in her chest, battling the cold prudence that had governed her for so long. It was a cruel dilemma. To let herself be drawn in was to relinquish the control she had fought so hard to regain, but to turn away might mean sealing her fate and perhaps others. Lucian raised a hand, slowly, uncertainly, as though unsure whether he was about to cross a line even he didn't fully understand. His fingers brushed the tips of her hair in a gesture so delicate it could have been mistaken for wind. It was full of meaning, a silent request, a quiet confession. Genevieve closed her eyes for a heartbeat, just long enough to remember the woman she had been before the grief, before the betrayals. When she opened them again, his gaze was so close she could see the stormy blend of gray and blue in his irises. Neither of them could say who moved first, but the distance between them vanished. Their faces drew near, pulled by a force that defied logic. His breath mingled with hers, and Genevieve felt the dizzying, dangerous thrill of a precipice about to be leapt. And then footsteps. The sharp rhythm of someone approaching echoed through the winter garden. Genevieve recoiled suddenly, her face still mere inches from his, her heart hammering inside her chest. A servant, breathless, emerged between the columns, lantern flickering in his trembling hands. "Forgive me, my ladies, my lords," the boy stammered, red-faced. "The Marquise requests your Grace's presence in the salon." Genevieve, forged in the fires of court life, composed herself in an instant. She turned to the servant with a serene nod, as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't just tilted. "Tell the Marquise I'll be there shortly," she said, her voice smooth and unshakable. The boy bowed and hurried away as swiftly as he'd arrived. For a few more seconds, Genevieve and Lucian remained frozen, the newly restored distance between them somehow more painful than the closeness had been. Lucian bowed once more, deeper this time, as if acknowledging a silent and temporary defeat. "Not tonight," he said, so quietly she barely heard, "but the game isn't over, my winter lady." And with slow, reluctant steps he melted back into the shadows of the columns, leaving her alone beneath the cold moonlight and the fading scent of sleeping flowers. Genevieve remained still, pressing a hand to her chest as if to still the wild heartbeat within. She knew she should not trust him, she knew she should not trust anyone. But the heart, that silent traitor, had made its decision long before reason had its say. The night watched her, silent and complicit, as Genevieve made her way back toward the lighted salon, carrying with her the invisible imprint of an encounter that would change her life forever. Morning in Montclair was born shrouded in thick fog, as if time itself hesitated to move forward. The gardens, still asleep beneath the mist, felt like echoes from an ancient world, and the marble statues, half veiled by the low clouds, stood as silent sentinels of a past unwilling to disappear. Inside the chateau, the atmosphere mirrored the same uncertainty that hung over the landscape. Tapestries whispered under the hurried steps of servants, and the scent of freshly extinguished candles clung to the cold air of the corridors. Genevieve de Montclair, dressed in a fine wool gown of soft pearl gray, walked with steady steps through the hall of mirrors, where her reflection multiplied endlessly in the polished glass, countless versions of herself. That morning Grimaud had requested a private meeting, an unusual and troubling request. The old butler, whose loyalty was more solid than the chateau's very walls, rarely sought confidential conversations without a serious reason, and so Genevieve made her way toward the reading room, heart tight and mind alert. She found Grimaud standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders rigid as stone. The light filtered through the glass, casting soft highlights on a face lined by time and the weight of silently borne responsibilities. He turned at the sound of her footsteps and, without preamble, bowed his head slightly. "My lady," he said in a low, contained voice, "what I must reveal today may change what you believe about the past." Genevieve approached slowly, her gaze steady, though a shadow of unease flickered within her chest. "Speak," she commanded plainly, like one who no longer fears confronting ghosts. Grimaud hesitated for only a moment, as if weighing every word before releasing it into the heavy air. Before Antoine's death, the Marquis de Villiers was spying on him. The silence that followed was as thick as the fog outside. For a moment Genevieve couldn't breathe. The words echoed violently inside her, waking painful memories of evasive glances, letters that never arrived, nights when Antoine withdrew into himself, as if carrying a burden too heavy to share. Spying, she repeated, her voice rough, as if the full meaning of the word still struggled to take hold. Grimaud nodded, his face grave. Documents and confidential reports indicate that Villiers was monitoring your husband's activities, his meetings, his alliances, even his hidden debts. Genevieve closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if bracing against an invisible blow. When she opened them again, they burned with a controlled fire, a resolve that no sorrow could extinguish. Why? Grimaud shrugged, weariness in his posture. Ambition. Antoine had uncovered something that threatened very powerful interests. Villiers simply acted first. Genevieve walked to the cold hearth and placed a delicate hand on the stone mantel. The chill seemed to seep through her skin and into her bones. Now everything made sense, the sudden withdrawal of former allies, the fear behind Antoine's eyes, the void his death had left, so convenient for some. She did not cry, she was beyond tears, her mourning had become a silent sharpened blade. Meanwhile, on the other side of the estate, something equally unsettling was unfolding. At the improvised market near the main gate, where servants, soldiers, and small merchants mingled under the casual watch of the guards, a commotion had begun to draw attention. Benoit, the young poet with burning eyes, had been accused of theft by an itinerant bookseller. The accusation was crude, likely fabricated, but enough to justify intervention by the king's soldiers. Desperate, the young man defended himself eloquently, but his words were drowned out by the merchants' shouting and the cruel laughter of the soldiers, who secretly longed for an excuse to assert their authority. That was when Lucien Ashford appeared, with the quiet command of a man used to being obeyed. Without losing his composure, he approached the soldiers, exchanged a few words, and discreetly revealed the royal seal concealed beneath his coat. The accusation vanished like smoke in the wind. Benoit, stunned, offered a hasty bow of thanks, unaware of who had truly intervened. Lucien merely watched him closely, like someone who recognized, without fully understanding, the hidden worth of an unplaced pawn. As tempers cooled at the market inside the chateau, Charlotte de Brissac, driven by a curiosity that stretched the boundaries of propriety for a young noblewoman, approached Genevieve with something hidden beneath her lace shawl. Genevieve, still lost in heavy thoughts, frowned slightly at her approach. Visibly nervous, Charlotte extended a handful of folded papers. "I found these among Benoit's belongings," she whispered, with the urgency of someone revealing a dangerous secret. Genevieve unfolded them slowly. They were illustrated pamphlets printed in black ink on cheap paper, calls for revolution, accusations against aristocratic corruption, thinly veiled incitements to uprising. Her heart tightened with a mix of shock and fear. The drawings were skillfully done, the texts filled with a sharp intelligence that made them even more dangerous. In that moment of clarity, like a blade catching the light, she understood that something far greater was moving in the shadows of society, something that could swallow not only the guilty, but also the innocent. She looked up and met in Charlotte's eyes a reflection of her own unease. Genevieve knew she could no longer ignore the signs. The veil that separated aristocracy from the people was beginning to tear, and the consequences could be devastating. With a firm hand, she tucked the pamphlets into the folds of her dress. "Tell no one about this," she said, in a low voice steeped in authority. Charlotte nodded, her eyes wide with the gravity of the warning. As the girl withdrew, Genevieve remained still, feeling the invisible weight of a new responsibility descend upon shoulders already worn by loss and disillusion. In the hall of mirrors, her multiplied reflections seemed to watch her in silence, demanding decisions she did not yet know how to make. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift, revealing a dull sky and the silent promise of stormy days ahead. Genevieve understood, with the painful clarity of one betrayed by history itself, that the real danger didn't lie solely in secret meetings or political alliances. The true threat, the deadliest one, was what moved at the unseen edges of the established order. And against that, not even Versailles gilded salons could offer protection. The late afternoon painted the sky over Montclair in deep hues of copper and lilac, while the first winds of evening curled across the sleeping fields, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Inside the chateau, the flickering torchlight cast long shadows across the stone walls, where portraits of silent ancestors seemed to watch in quiet reproach all that was unfolding behind those walls. Genevieve de Montclair stood in the library, a vaulted room with Gothic windows that filtered the dying light of day into golden fragments. The soft sound of her steps on the Persian rug was the only thing breaking the thick silence as she waited, standing, for the man who now occupied her thoughts with growing inevitability. Lucian Ashford appeared like a shadow taking shape, emerging from behind the heavy curtains at the entrance. His presence filled the room even before his voice did. He wore a dark wool cloak still damp from the night's moisture, and his eyes, beneath furrowed brows, held the silent flame of contained urgency. Genevieve lifted her chin in a gesture of calm defiance, masking the storm of emotions stirring within her behind a veneer of composure. "You're late," she said, each word heavy with meaning. Lucian gave a brief bow, but one charged with genuine deference, rare among the men she had known. "I had to take precautions," he replied, his voice low and vibrant like distant thunder. "We're being watched." Genevieve nodded, unsurprised. In Montclair, as in Versailles, the walls had ears, and the echo of a whisper could travel across a lifetime. Wasting no time, she went straight to the point. "I will help you," she said, her decision slicing through the air like a drawn sword, but under certain conditions. Lucian remained still, his eyes fixed on her, reading every nuance of her expression. "I'm listening," he said, with the patience of a man who knows the value of waiting. Genevieve walked to one of the windows, staring out at the golden expanse of the garden, now slowly being swallowed by twilight. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet but resolute. "I will not be a pawn in foreign games. My actions will protect Montclair and those under my care. I demand to be informed of every step of your plan. No omissions, no lies, and above all, nothing that would put innocent lives at risk." Lucian approached but kept a respectful distance, as though any hasty gesture might shatter the fragile alliance forming between them. "I agree," he said, his voice weighted with a sincerity that Genevieve, despite her defenses, believed. In that moment, a silent pact was forged between them, strong as iron, fragile as glass. Together, they leaned over the large central table where Genevieve unrolled a detailed map of Versailles' diplomatic wing. By the trembling candlelight they traced routes and alternatives, names and faces, each detail carefully considered. The objective was simple in theory, but dangerous in execution: to infiltrate a private dinner for Spanish diplomats, an event where crucial information on secret agreements would be exchanged under the guise of toasts and pleasantries. Genevieve studied every move with the sharp mind of a strategist. Her delicate fingers glided across the map, outlining hidden paths, while Lucian watched her with silent admiration that threatened to show in ways he couldn't quite control. "The kitchens," she suggested, not looking up. "During the wine service changeover, the confusion will shield us." Lucian nodded, the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. "Bold and clever," he murmured. Genevieve looked up, and for a brief moment their eyes met in a quiet clash of wills and unspoken promises. Elsewhere in the chateau, far from the aristocracy's watchful eyes, Colette, the ever-faithful maid, had begun her own investigation. Without Genevieve's knowledge, she had decided to follow the clues left by Benoit, whose connection to revolutionary pamphlets troubled her more than she dared admit. Moved by both loyalty and intuition, Colette searched the young man's quarters discreetly, sifting through his books and notes for any hint of his true intentions. Each finding, each suspicious detail, was stored in her memory like pieces of a puzzle still incomplete. Meanwhile, in his luxurious Paris residence, the Marquis de Villiers observed with cold eyes the changes taking shape at the edges of his dominion. Something in Genevieve de Montclair had shifted. Her steps, once hesitant and resigned, had grown firm and deliberate. Her presence, once discreet, now radiated a quiet strength he could not ignore. With a smile that never reached his eyes, Villiers drummed his fingers on the arm of his crimson velvet chair. "Little Duchess," he muttered to himself, "who taught you to dance with snakes?" And so he resolved to watch her more closely than ever before. Back at Montclair, as the night deepened like a veil of unseen danger, Genevieve and Lucian finalized the last details of the plan. The candlelight threw their shadows entwined across the library walls, creating the illusion that on some deeper level, they were already bound by invisible ties. When the meeting ended, Genevieve rose with the dignity she never abandoned, even in the face of the fiercest storms. "Don't place your trust in me so easily, monsieur," she warned with a half-smile that was both invitation and challenge. Lucian bowed slowly, a gesture filled with respect, and something more, something he did not yet dare to name. "Trust, my lady," he said, his voice a whisper laced with promise, "is a currency we'll both have to learn to spend wisely." Genevieve remained still as he walked away, the echo of his boots fading down the silent corridors. Only when she was alone did she place a hand over her chest, where her heart beat with a force that defied her usual restraint. She knew she was stepping into a minefield. She knew that every step from that night forward could be her last in freedom. But she also knew, with the certainty of those forged in pain, that she would not turn back. The unspoken promise, sealed in glances and shared silences, would be the flame guiding them both through the darkness to come. The dinner at Versailles unfolded with the usual grandeur of courtly nights. The dark wooden tables were laden with fine dishes and crystal goblets that reflected the flickering candlelight above, creating an almost magical ambiance, where conversations and laughter intertwined like notes of a sophisticated melody. The aristocrats moved with the elegance of those well-versed in splendor, and behind their smiles and polished discourse, complex schemes and hidden agendas bloomed in the shadows. Genevieve de Montclair was present, as always, with her impeccable composure and the calm assurance of someone who knew her presence would never go unnoticed. Her emerald silk gown, adorned with delicate gold-threaded lace, shimmered in the candlelight. Though she wore no mask, her posture and manner radiated an air of mystery that intrigued those around her. She was not there as just another guest, but as someone with a clearly defined purpose. The court, in this dinner disguised as diplomacy, resembled a council of diplomats. Conversations touched on matters of politics and alliance. There were no masks at this event, only the careful dance of words and smiles. Genevieve, fully aware of the role she had to play, knew she must conduct herself with subtlety, making sure her presence was felt just enough to dispel suspicion without attracting it. Seated between two nobles, she engaged with those around her with gentle charm, yet never ventured too deeply into any discussion. Her words were carefully chosen, never too much, never too little, like the precise movements of someone keeping to the background while Lucian, disguised as a foreign diplomat, executed the essential exchange of documents. While Genevieve remained composed, Charlotte de Brissac, seated nearby, observed her with growing curiosity. Something within her young soul told her to stay alert. The sighs and quiet laughter of the nobles did not convince her that everything was as it appeared. She felt uneasy, as if an invisible curtain were being lifted, revealing truths no one dared to face. But for now, what she saw was only a reflection, not the full truth. At her side, Madeleine de Brissac maintained her usual silent vigilance over every move in the room. She, more than anyone, knew that in Versailles what seemed harmless often concealed the greatest threats. Madeleine knew more than she let on. And though the court was filled with distractions, she focused on the way people positioned themselves, as if an invisible game were already in progress. Then, as Genevieve subtly diverted attention, Captain de la Tour entered the salon. He remained discreetly on the margins, but his eyes were sharp and fast. He studied Lucian with the focused gaze of a man who understood the value of every movement. The English Duke was no mere diplomat. De la Tour, unmoved by the court's social formalities, was there to see beyond what was permitted. Throughout the dinner, conversation flowed as expected, but with each exchange of words, de la Tour sensed something approaching. The scent of a secret burned in his chest. Villiers, with his icy smile, watched the dance of words and gestures unfold before him. Though his thoughts were elsewhere, calculating his next moves, he sensed something was stirring, something that could shift the balance of power, but doubt still gnawed at him. As Genevieve rose gracefully from the table, allowing others to believe she was stepping away to let the conversation continue, Lucian knew the moment of the exchange was near. His heart pounded with every move he made, but duty, more than fear, kept him steady. The hours at the banquet were merely a prelude to what was to come. What would be revealed next would alter the game entirely. In silence, Genevieve and Lucian played their shadow game beneath the glittering chandeliers of Versailles, as the court continued its intricate dance of intrigue. Another piece was moved, and the tangled fates of those involved began to drift apart, perhaps for good. The night's end would bring not only the promise of another quiet victory for Genevieve, but also the threat of something far greater, a discovery that could shake the very foundations of the court. The dance of the court continued, but at its very heart, an invisible thread was already tying together the destinies of those destined to collide. The wind howled fiercely that night in Montclair, rushing between the stone towers and across the slumbering gardens like an anxious messenger, heavy with omens. The moon, high and cold in the sky, cast its silver light over the chateau, etching every statue, every eave, and every silent footstep in sharp shadow. each one belonging to someone plotting fate beneath the cloak of darkness. In the reception hall, a discreet ball gathered some of the king's most notorious allies. The music, soft and distant, seemed incapable of warming hearts that hid wicked intentions behind courteous masks. Genevieve de Montclair, resplendent in a dark green silk gown, moved among the guests with the flawless dignity that suffering had honed over the years. Her gray eyes, alert and unreadable, swept across the room like silent sentinels. Not far away, Benoit, the young poet whose presence had become as frequent as it was unsettling, was reciting verses softly to a small circle of impressionable ladies. His disheveled hair and enigmatic smile easily enchanted the unsuspecting. But that night there was a new weight in his gaze, a restlessness that no tender words could conceal. It was then that Captain de la Tour entered the hall, his eyes unflinching and his military posture unmistakable. His uniform gleamed beneath the chandelier light, and the sound of his boots echoed like war drums through the courtly murmur. De la Tour stopped before Benoit, studying him with the eyes of a predator. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "Monsieur Benoit," he said, his voice as sharp as a sheathed blade, "or whatever name you choose to wear tonight, I'm afraid your mask fell long before this ball began." Benoit raised his eyebrows with a defiant smile, but the flash of panic in his eyes did not go unnoticed. "I don't know what you're suggesting, Captain," he replied with a mocking bow. De la Tour took a step forward and pulled a small leather folder from inside his coat. He opened it in full view, revealing documents stamped with the seal of Spain. "Spy," he declared, his tone firm, "planted among us to gather sensitive information under the disguise of a mere dreamer." Gasps rippled through the hall, eyes widened, fingers pointed. The music stopped abruptly, and the stunned musicians froze with their instruments suspended in midair like unfinished gestures. Genevieve, upon hearing the accusation, felt a sharp stab in her chest. She looked at Benoit with a mix of surprise and bitter disappointment. Even though she had harbored suspicions, she had not expected a betrayal so profound. Benoit, however, did not surrender easily. With a swift motion, he toppled a tray of glasses, the crash scattering shards and wine across the floor. In the confusion, he slipped away through the stunned crowd, moving with the agility of someone who knew every hidden passage in an old castle. It was Colette who reacted first. The young maid, who had watched everything with wide, fearful eyes, darted toward one of the side doors, knowing exactly where Benoit would emerge. When she saw him racing down the corridor, she grabbed his hand without hesitation and pulled him into a secret passage behind a tapestry. Their hearts pounded like war drums in their chests. In the cramped dark space, surrounded only by the sound of their own breath, Benoit looked at Colette, and in her he saw not just escape, but a flicker of something deeper and forbidden. She in turn felt the heat of his hand against hers, the tension in his body so close to hers, and something within her cracked open, something nameless, burning bright. No words, no promises, only glances and the raw urgency of survival. In that moment, an invisible, irrevocable bond was born between them. As the search swept through the chateau and de la Tour barked orders to the guards, Benoit and Colette vanished into the secret corridors, like shadows fleeing the relentless light of truth. At that same moment, in the private chambers of Montclair, Genevieve was facing her own devastating revelation. Grimaud, who had delivered crucial intelligence to her so many times, now stood before her with somber eyes and an aged parchment in his hands. There was such sorrow in his expression that Genevieve knew, before a single word was spoken, that her world was about to collapse. The parchment, sealed with the Montclair crest and Antoine's personal mark, held a truth she never could have imagined. Her late husband, the man to whom she had devoted years of love and loyalty, had signed a secret pact with the Marquis de Villiers, a deal that involved not only political alliances but also Genevieve herself, offered as a bargaining token in a filthy trade for power and wealth. She read Antoine's handwriting, every word slicing into her soul like a dagger. The room spun around her. The fireplace roared, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding within those walls. The curtains fluttered in the wind, sweeping through the half-open windows, as if the chateau itself whispered in mourning. Genevieve let the parchment fall from her hands. She staggered to the nearest armchair and collapsed like a puppet whose final string had snapped. The tears came without warning, without restraint. They were not soft, discreet tears like those she had shed in secret so many times before. These were ragged sobs born of a pain so deep it seemed to echo in the very stones of the walls, piercing through centuries of pride and grandeur. Grimaud, honoring the sacredness of her silent grief, withdrew quietly, leaving her alone with the weight of her new reality. Genevieve, crumpled in the chair like a shadow of herself, felt trust, hope, love, everything crumble within her chest. That night, as the chateau slept beneath an indifferent moon, Genevieve de Montclair finally understood that in the court's game, there was no room for illusions. Not even love was pure. And to survive, she would have to forge a new woman within herself, one made not of promises but of steel. Dawn's silver veil spread across Montclair, casting the sleeping fields in a melancholy almost sacred. The chateau's corridors, silent as crypts, held secrets that breathed between cold stone and hand-stitched tapestries. The wind whispered laments through the cracks in the windows, carrying with it the distant scent of roses from the garden, now withered by the approach of winter. Genevieve de Montclair walked slowly through the stained-glass gallery, wrapped in a dark velvet cloak that barely shielded her from the chill. Both outside and within, her steps were light, almost hesitant, as if each stone beneath her feet might split open and swallow her into the past she fought so hard to forget. She knew Lucian Ashford was waiting in the old music room, a space long abandoned by time, forgotten by the court, and perfect for encounters that demanded more than words. The discreet note, delivered by Colette with silent, knowing eyes, still burned between Genevieve's fingers like an indecent promise. She entered the room unannounced. The faint glow of the fireplace cast restless shadows on the walls, dancing to the rhythm of flickering flames. Lucian stood with his back to her, staring into the fire as if searching for answers to the questions that weighed on his soul. Genevieve paused in the doorway, absorbing the image of the man who had become, against all reason, the center of her most intimate turmoil. Every line of his shoulders, every restrained movement of the hand gripping his cane near the fire, spoke of a tension almost unbearable. When Lucian turned, his eyes found hers, and in that instant all distance, all caution, all carefully built denial collapsed like a dam breaking under the force of a flood. No words were spoken. Genevieve crossed the room with steady steps, her cloak slipping from her shoulders like a falling petal. She stopped just inches from him, feeling the warmth of his presence wrap around her skin like a caress. Lucian raised a hand and with trembling fingers touched her face, a gesture as reverent and hesitant as it was desperate. Genevieve closed her eyes, allowing herself for the first time in so long to feel freely, without restraint, without the chains of reason that had always bound her. The kiss that followed was a contained explosion, slow at first, almost a plea, then inevitably deeper, more urgent, as if both knew that time was their enemy. Lucian's hands encircled her waist, pulling her closer while her fingers slid up the coarse fabric of his shirt to find the warm skin at the nape of his neck. The world beyond that room ceased to exist. There was only them, only that stolen moment, as beautiful and as doomed as roses blooming on the eve of frost. Lucian was the first to pull away, breathless, his eyes closed as if trying to imprint the feeling onto his soul. "We have to stop," he whispered, though his voice betrayed a lack of conviction. Genevieve opened her eyes slowly, their glow blurred by the emotion swelling in her chest. "Then stop," she murmured, knowing full well that no force on earth could make him do so now. The second kiss was even deeper, even more painful, as if both knew it would be the only one, the last, the one that would mark them forever. But reality, as always, waited mercilessly at the door. As Genevieve and Lucian surrendered to forbidden love, Grimaud moved through the corridor with heavy steps. In his hands he carried a bundle of papers, documents so toxic they seemed to burn, each one more explosive than the last. He burst into the music room without ceremony, the door crashing open like thunder through the silent walls. Genevieve and Lucian broke apart instantly, both breathless, both flushed and alert. The old butler, his expression carved from stone like a man fulfilling a bitter duty, tossed the documents onto the table. "We need to talk," he said, ignoring the tension that lingered in the air. Genevieve, still trembling, composed herself with the swift precision of someone who had learned to survive among predators. Lucian squared his shoulders, aware that the moment had come to face the weight of his own secrets. Grimaud, without preamble, pulled one of the documents forward and, with the coldness of an executioner, revealed the link connecting Lucian Ashford to the death of Antoine de Montclair. Not a direct killer, but a man whose service, whose orders, whose hidden missions had contributed, however indirectly, to the tragic end of the man who had once been Genevieve's husband. Few words were needed, every syllable landed like a sword strike. Genevieve stood frozen, her hands clenched over her skirt, eyes locked on Lucian, searching in the features of the man she loved for a denial that never came. Lucian lowered his gaze, and in that single silent gesture confirmed the truth. The pain that tore through Genevieve made her stumble. It was as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet, as if the kiss still burning on her lips had become an open wound, as if every act of love, every surrender, every sliver of hope had been murdered alongside the last trace of faith she held in her heart. Grimo, honoring the silence now thick with mourning, stepped back, leaving them alone to face the abyss that had opened between them. Lucian made a move to approach her, but Genevieve raised a hand, sharp, commanding, stopping him in his tracks. The look she gave him held no hatred. It was worse. It held the silent grief of someone who had lost everything. Without a single word, Genevieve turned and crossed the room like a fallen queen, dignified to the end. Lucian remained motionless, alone, crushed beneath the weight of his choices. The kiss they had shared, the love born in silence and sorrow, was now nothing more than an invisible scar, eternal. And on the frozen walls of Montclair, in that cruel and sleepless dawn, the shattered promise of two broken hearts echoed like the cold blade of a sentence without appeal. Dawn broke over Montclair with a biting chill, bearing the weight of the night before. Fog crept across the gardens like a morning veil draped over the land, wrapping the bare trees and stone paths in a silence so heavy it seemed to suspend the chateau's very breath. In the great hall, where echoes of past glories still lingered in faded tapestries, Genevieve de Montclair stood before the grand double doors that led to the main entrance. A dark cloak enveloped her slender figure, but it was her expression, cold as marble, steady as fate, that revealed the decision carved by pain and resolve. Before her stood Lucian Ashford, the man who had dared to touch her heart and shatter her trust, waiting with the quiet resignation of someone who had already lost all that mattered. Genevieve delivered no speech. There was no need to clothe in words an order that hung in the air like a suspended blade. Lucian bowed his head slightly, a gesture of silent acknowledgement. His eyes, shadowed with restrained sorrow, remained fixed on hers for one last, endless moment, as if trying to etch her image into the depths of his soul. Then he turned and crossed the hall with slow, deliberate steps, the sound of his boots echoing against the marble like the toll of a funeral bell. Without looking back, he pushed open the heavy doors and left the chateau, taking with him the bitter weight of voluntary exile. Genevieve did not move, still as the stone columns that held Montclair upright. Only when the final echo of Lucien's footsteps faded into the distance did she allow herself to draw a deep breath, feeling emptiness flood her chest like a cold wave. In the days that followed, the chateau sank into a tomb-like silence. The servants moved with hushed steps, as if afraid to disturb the invisible mourning that now enveloped the house. Grimo, ever loyal, remained close but quiet, like an old hound who understands his master's sorrow without needing explanation. In Paris, the scene was very different. The Marquis de Villiers, a man of insatiable ambition and venomous charm, was intensifying his influence at court. With carefully chosen words and promises wrapped in silk, he insinuated himself deeper into the corridors of power, slowly poisoning the already weary heart of the king. In private meetings where light barely touched the faces of conspirators and deals were sealed with handshakes colder than steel, Villiers wove his assent. The fall of Montclair was not enough for him. He wanted more. He wanted Genevieve broken, not just in fortune but in spirit. In the most private wing of Chateau de Brissac, tension was also fermenting. Charlotte, the young woman with a romantic soul and untamed heart, found herself torn between the duty imposed by her noble blood and the forbidden love that had quietly blossomed between her and Benoit, the fugitive whose very existence was now a palpable threat. Seated by the window, her forehead resting against the cold glass, Charlotte let her tears fall freely. Fear and longing waged a cruel battle inside her chest. The call of love, with all its dizzying sweetness, felt more impossible to resist with each passing day. It was in that moment of vulnerability that Madeleine found her. The Marquise, always so composed and wise, entered without knocking, her eyes reading every detail of her sister's pain. She approached slowly, as if stepping over fragile ground. She sat beside Charlotte, taking her hand with a gesture both firm and gentle. "You're thinking of running," Madeleine said, not as a question but a truth already known. Charlotte only nodded, unable to form words. Madeleine sighed, gazing out the window at the pale horizon. "Passion burns quickly," she murmured, her voice laced with a sorrow Charlotte had never heard before, "but ideals endure." Charlotte turned to her, eyes wide with pain and uncertainty. "It's not just passion," she protested, her voice trembling, "it's something more, it's—" Madeline smiled, a sad, tender smile. "Perhaps it is. Perhaps it's the kind of love that defies the world, but little one, even love needs strong roots to survive the winds that blow from Versailles." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft sound of wind brushing the window panes. Madeline gently squeezed her sister's hand. "I don't ask you to renounce what you feel," she continued, "but to choose wisely when to fight and when to wait. Some battles are not won with a sword but with patience." Charlotte, her face still wet with tears, leaned against Madeline's shoulder, allowing herself for a brief moment to be the frightened girl she still was. Meanwhile in Paris, Lucien wandered the cobblestone streets cloaked in darkness, his heart torn between duty and loss. In the shadows of taverns frequented by soldiers and spies, he gathered fragments of information, drafted plans that might never come to life. Every unfamiliar face, every suspicious movement reminded him that he had no home now, not in Montclair, not anywhere. With every step, he carried the image of Genevieve, the woman who had shown him a glimpse of redemption, whose trust he had lost forever. At the chateau, Genevieve continued to live, to breathe, to lead, but now with the cold precision of someone who had known the full extent of betrayal. The woman who stood before the mirror each morning was no longer the same. Pain had etched a new Genevieve into her features, stronger, more unyielding. On long, solitary nights, when the wind seemed to whisper her name, Genevieve allowed herself, just for a moment, to remember the warmth of a kiss, the promise of a future that would never come to pass. Then she would dry the tears that never fell, and raise once again the walls around her soul. Because in Montclair now, there was no longer room for weakness. Only for the fight. And the war for survival had only just begun. Paris awoke beneath a thick veil of fog, where the pale, hesitant sun struggled to pierce the curtain of smoke rising from chimneys and hidden alleys. In the early morning hours, the deserted streets whispered ancient secrets between worn stones and shuttered windows. The city, pulsing with silences and promises, was a labyrinth where truth hid like a wounded animal. Lucien Ashford, wrapped in a heavy dark overcoat, walked briskly through the lesser-watched alleys of the Marais. The morning cold bit at his skin, but it was the weight of what he knew and what he still had to uncover that truly froze his spirit. Since leaving Montclair, he had carried within him not just the guilt of betrayal, but a fierce determination to somehow repair the damage he had caused. The information he had gathered over the past few weeks pointed to something far more sinister than illicit political alliances. Beneath the golden smiles of the court, behind toasts and parties, a secret network of espionage was growing, rooted in the aristocracy and feeding on blood, betrayal, and boundless ambition. And at the center of that web, like a patient spider, sat the Marquis de Villiers. Lucien had learned the truth on a particularly grim night when an informant, a coachman with haunted eyes and wine-stained teeth, had muttered through trembling lips that Villiers did not merely seek to consolidate power, he intended to eliminate obstacles, permanently. And Genevieve de Montclair, so proud, so unyielding, was the greatest of those obstacles. The discovery gripped Lucien's chest like an iron fist, her image, those gray eyes, her regal bearing, the fragility buried beneath layers of strength would not leave him, and now, more than ever, he understood, protecting Genevieve was the only redemption left for his stained soul. In a rundown tavern in the Saint Antoine district, he met with the one man he trusted, Grimaud. The old butler, who had momentarily left Montclair to protect his lady, appeared like a solid shadow in the dimly lit room. His presence was a silent reminder that for some, loyalty was holier than life itself. They sat at a secluded table, and amidst the acrid smell of cheap wine and chimney smoke, they whispered their truths. "There's a traitor among the Duchess's staff," said Grimaud, his blue eyes hardened by constant vigilance. "Someone is selling information to Villiers." Lucien nodded, jaw clenched. "Then we must act before they do." Grimaud didn't answer. He simply raised one thick eyebrow, a gesture that said more than words ever could. That very night, Paris seemed to breathe danger in every corner. A fine rain had begun to fall, turning the cobblestones into fractured mirrors reflecting the soft glow of lanterns. Armed only with his resolve and a dagger hidden beneath a worn coat, Grimaud discreetly followed one of the suspected servants. The man, plain and unremarkable, walked nervously through the dark streets, glancing over his shoulder every few steps, as if sensing the presence of his invisible hunter. When the traitor tried to cut through a narrow alley, Grimaud struck. The attack was silent and precise, a master's move. The blade, swift as justice, found the man's heart before he could scream or run. His body crumpled lifeless to the wet stones, swallowed by a city that had seen far too many tragedies. Grimaud walked away without looking back, fully aware that the blood spilled was the cruel price of loyalty. Meanwhile, Colette, tireless in her devotion to the Duchess, had managed, through cunning and courage, to obtain tangible proof of the conspiracy threatening Montclair. Damning documents, secret payment lists, coded letters naming those willing to betray the crown and destroy Genevieve. Knowing the danger she faced, Colette went to the only man who might turn the tide, Captain de la Tour. They met discreetly in an abandoned convent along the banks of the Seine, where the shadows beneath ancient arches cloaked their forbidden exchange. De la Tour, a man of rigid principles and falcon's eyes, read the documents with increasing gravity. With each line, his face grew darker, silent fury burning behind his gaze. "This is deeper than I imagined," he murmured, folding the papers and slipping them into his coat. "If this is true, Villiers isn't just a threat to the Duchess, he's a threat to France." Colette simply nodded, her face steady despite the fear churning in her belly. "Do what must be done," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Save Montclair." The captain placed a gloved hand on her shoulder, a brief gesture heavy with respect. "I will not rest while innocent blood is threatened." That same night, as the city slept beneath its illusion of safety, hidden forces began to stir. Lucien, standing at a grime-streaked window in his modest room in the Marais, watched the scattered lights of Paris. Each flicker, each shadow, reminded him of the danger closing in. In the deepest part of his soul, he knew, to save Genevieve, he would have to face not only Villiers, but also the darkest parts of himself. Grimaud, back in their safe house, cleaned the blood from his blade in silence, his thoughts as dark as the choices loyalty demanded. Colette, hidden in the convent's deserted wing, prayed quietly, asking for strength to face the storm looming on the horizon. And in the golden halls of Versailles, where the king slept in his silk-lined bed, the whispers of betrayal drifted between marble columns, heralding a tempest no power or glory could hold back. The walls of Paris, silent witnesses to 1,000 conspiracies, were slowly closing in around the intertwined fates of Genevieve, Lucien, Colette, and Grimaud. And the deadly game that had begun in the shadows neared its inevitable climax, where love, honor, and betrayal would clash like swords in a final duel. The rising sun cast a cold golden hue over the fields of Versailles, as if even the heavens hesitated to bless a day so heavy with irreversible decisions. The palace fountains, once exuberant, stood still, silent witnesses to a fate unfolding behind heavy doors and polished smiles. In the gray morning light, the Brissac carriage rolled down the main avenue, its wheels raising soft clouds of dust that lingered in the air like invisible ghosts. Inside, Charlotte de Brissac sat stiffly, hands clenched in her lap, her face pale, eyes fixed on some indistinct point on the horizon. Her father, the Duke of Brissac, regarded her with the cold expression of someone negotiating land or horses, not the future of his own daughter. To him, Charlotte was just another piece on the grand chessboard of politics, a valuable token to seal alliances and consolidate power. The arranged marriage to a provincial baron, a coarse man with dubious intentions, was the price of ambition. But within Charlotte surged a silent cry, a stifled revolt threatening to burst at any moment. Her heart, still wounded by her forbidden love for Benoit, beat unsteadily beneath her tight corset. Each beat was a wordless protest against a destiny others tried to impose. Elsewhere in the discreet wings of the palace, Madeleine de Brissac was already spinning her own plans. The Marquise, clever and composed, understood better than anyone the gears of power that turned Versailles. She knew that well-placed words could weigh more than armies, and she was determined to sabotage Charlotte's marriage, even if it cost her reputation or safety. In discreet meetings with ministers and influential advisors, Madeleine sowed carefully disguised rumors, casting subtle doubts about the character and fortune of the suitor her father had chosen. Small seeds of suspicion, planted with precision, capable of poisoning even the most ironclad agreements. Meanwhile, in the inner chambers of the palace, another storm was gathering. Genevieve de Montclair, dressed in black as if clad in her own defiance, had been summoned to appear before the king. The accusation, couched in the polished language of royal decrees, was conspiracy against the crown, built upon false evidence expertly fabricated by Villiers' allies. Upon entering the grand audience hall, Genevieve felt the eyes pierce her like poisoned arrows. Men and women draped in silk and adorned with jewels whispered behind their fans and practiced smiles, hiding malice beneath elegance. The king, aged and dulled by years of intrigue, watched her from the throne with clouded eyes, as if seeking not the truth, but only the spectacle the court demanded. Genevieve stopped in the center of the hall, shoulders squared, head high. There was no fear in her bearing, only the unbreakable dignity of someone who has already lost everything, and thus has nothing left to fear. A minister raised his voice, reading the charges with the indifference of someone reciting a sentence already decided. Genevieve de Montclair, you stand accused of sedition, of conspiring against the crown's security, and of forging dangerous alliances with foreign powers. The hall hummed with murmured approval, hungry for a scandal to color their otherwise monotonous days. Genevieve listened in silence, allowing each word to echo off the gilded walls like lines from a poorly staged play. When the minister finished, she stepped forward, and her voice, when it came, was clear, sharp, and undeniable. I am not here to defend myself against lies, I am here to accuse. Silence fell like a guillotine blade, even time seemed to stop. Genevieve scanned the faces before her, pausing on the cold gaze of Villiers, who looked back at her with a cruel, confident smile. I accuse the Marquis de Villiers of treason against this crown, she declared, her voice echoing through the marble hall, of conspiring with foreign powers, of orchestrating the assassination of loyal servants to the king, and of manipulating this throne with deceit. The shock was immediate. Some ladies covered their mouths with fans, noblemen exchanged glances of disbelief and fear. Genevieve's boldness, openly defying one of the most powerful men at Versailles, was so daring that for a moment everyone forgot how to breathe. The king partially rose from his throne, confusion etched into his tired face. Villiers stepped forward, fury flashing in his eyes. These are the words of a desperate woman, he said, his voice laced with poison. She seeks to hide her own crimes beneath the weight of false accusations. Genevieve did not flinch. From within her dress she drew a scroll, the evidence Colette had delivered in secret and which de la Tour had confirmed. With steady hands she laid it at the king's feet. Proof, she said, each syllable heavy with deadly resolve, proof of who your true enemy is, your majesty. Surprised, the king ordered a minister to collect the documents. Murmurs rose again, but this time they carried doubt and unease. Division was immediate. Some members of the court, former allies of Genevieve or quiet enemies of Villiers, began whispering their support for the Duchess. Others, afraid to confront established power, remained in the shadows, waiting to see which side would prevail. As the charges were read aloud, Villiers' face hardened into a mask of silent rage. Genevieve stood still, her chest lifted, like a tower withstanding the fury of the sea. She knew that in that moment she was fighting not just for herself, but for all those crushed by the rotten gears of the court, for those who still believed that honor and justice could survive amid Versailles' gilded corruption. The war that day would not be won with swords. It would be fought with words sharpened like blades. And for the first time in a long time, Genevieve felt that victory, though distant, was possible. The Parisian sky, on that winter morning, hung heavy over the city like a leaden veil. The clouds, low and swollen, threatened to burst at any moment, heralding not just a storm of rain but one of blood. In the inner courtyard of an old estate on the outskirts of the Seine, silence reigned. Gathered around like witnesses to a sacrifice stood a handful of nobles and officers, their faces hidden beneath heavy cloaks and tense stares. None of them were under any illusions about what was about to unfold. This was not a mere dispute of honor. Here, beneath the cold mist and the stern gaze of stone statues, the fate of a woman, a house, and perhaps an entire order would be decided. Captain de la Tour, dressed in dark dueling attire, gripped the hilt of his sword with steady hands. His face, hardened by experience and an unwavering sense of justice, remained impassive. Across from him, the Marquis de Villiers adjusted his gloves with meticulous gestures, a mocking smile curling his lips like a living scar. The rules had been established with the cold precision of a death contract, swords, no mercy, until one man fell or yielded. When the duel began, there were no cries, no cheers, only the sharp sound of metal slicing the air and the crunch of boots on frozen ground. Delatour struck first, with precise, confident movements, aiming to disarm Villiers with the same mastery he had shown on battlefields. The Marquis, cunning and treacherous, countered with swift and underhanded strikes, aiming not just for his opponent's body, but for the very soul of the fight. With every thrust, every dodge, the clash resembled a deadly dance, a choreography of hidden motives and invisible wounds. The onlookers watched in near religious silence, where each held breath weighed as much as the clash of steel. After long minutes that stretched like eternities, Delatour found his opening. With a quick pivot, he struck a blow that sliced Villiers' arm, sending a stream of crimson spilling across the fresh snow. The Marquis staggered, stunned more by the force of the blow than the pain. Before he could recover, Delatour pressed forward, delivering a final strike that brought him to his knees. The crowd held its breath. Villiers, bloodied hands pressed to the ground, stared downward. Defeated, in that moment, the mask of invincibility he had always worn crumbled, revealing the fragile, corrupted man behind titles and privilege. But Delatour's victory came at a price. During the duel, a treacherous thrust had pierced his side and blood now soaked through his shirt. His knees began to buckle, and the proud captain, steadfast to his last breath, had to be caught by his companions before collapsing. Meanwhile, in Montclair, Genevieve de Montclair was torn from the safety of her home under forged accusations and taken to a castle in the countryside, where she would be held under house arrest until the court decided her fate. The carriages that transported her, cold and heavy, rolled forward under the watchful eyes of guards loyal to Villiers, men who saw not a woman, but a symbol of resistance that needed to be silenced. Genevieve, hands folded in her lap, gazed out the window, refusing to let fear stain her dignity. Each stone on the road pierced her heart, each mile pulled her farther from freedom, but her eyes held only determination and the calm that defied her captors. In the days that followed, news of her imprisonment spread like wildfire, through golden halls and dark alleyways alike. And it was then that Lucian Ashford, defying direct orders from the English crown and risking his life, chose to act. Without uniform, without title, without visible allies, Lucian orchestrated a mission no general would have dared attempt. To infiltrate the castle where Genevieve was held would be an act of rebellion, not just against Villiers, but against the very structure of European aristocracy. But he did not hesitate. The plan unfolded beneath a moonless night. With a few loyal men and the secret passages of Montclair, still marked by the scars of old conspiracies, Lucian entered the castle's walls. Every step was a prayer, every shadow a possible end. He found Genevieve in her chamber, seated by the window, still as the statue of hope itself. When she saw him, a flicker of emotion passed through her gray eyes, quickly replaced by the steel composure that defined her. Lucian approached, kneeling before her with the reverence of a knight before his lady. "I've come to set you free," he said, his voice hoarse with effort and restrained emotion. Genevieve, for a moment, allowed herself to waver, her hand trembling slightly before resting on his. And then, with the same quiet courage that had always guided her, she rose and let him lead her into the shadows, toward freedom. Meanwhile, on the streets of Paris, Benoit, risking his own life, was distributing hastily printed pamphlets that publicly denounced Villiers' crimes and treason. The papers, carried like leaves on the wind, bore the hope of a silent revolt, truth inked in blood, exposing the lies that held up the powerful and awakening the conscience of the forgotten. Each pamphlet handed out was a stifled scream released. Each hand that received one was a promise that even in the darkest night, justice would find a crack through which to shine again. And so, amid swords, roses, and dreams of freedom, the fates of all became woven into a tapestry as beautiful as it was tragic, stitched together by unyielding hearts that refused to bow. The spring wind blew fiercely across the hills of the Loire that morning, carrying not the usual scent of newly blossomed flowers, but a deep, restless murmur that seemed to rise from the earth itself. In front of Chateau Montclair, a crowd had begun to gather, like the thick waves of a sea preparing to break free from the chains that had held it back for far too long. Peasants, craftsmen, soldiers, nobles with outraged hearts, and even discreet members of the court, all converged on the same point, drawn by an irresistible cry for justice. Their faces, marked by years of submission, now glowed with the spark of something new and powerful: hope. The chateau's grand windows, imposing and silent, seemed to watch with cold, unmoved eyes as the events unfolded, events that would change the course of many lives. Within the walls, the Marquis de Villiers felt the trap closing in. With every stomp of boots on the stone courtyard, with every whisper rising beyond the walls, his usual arrogance began to crack, revealing the raw, irrepressible fear of a man watching his empire crumble for the first time. He tried to escape. Through the chateau's secret passages, those same corridors where he had once slithered with conspiracies, he now crawled like a cornered animal. He wore plain clothes in the vain hope of passing unnoticed and carried a bag filled with gold coins, his last pitiful lifeline. But Grimaud was waiting. The old butler, fiercely loyal to Genevieve and merciless toward her enemies, intercepted Villiers in the stables as he tried to hastily saddle a horse. Grimaud's face was stone, his stance steel. Without a word, he disarmed the Marquis with a swift, practiced motion, forcing him to his knees in the mud. The pride that had once bound Villiers tighter than any chain was now reduced to dust. Under the stern watch of Grimaud and a group of armed villagers wielding pitchforks and makeshift torches, Villiers was dragged to the grand courtyard of Montclair, where for the first time in the Château's history, a people's trial would be held. The ancient stones, witnesses to generations of intrigues and glories, now bore witness to the fall of one of the most powerful men in France. Genevieve, escorted to the center of the courtyard by Lucien and de la Tour, stood tall. Her black dress billowed in the wind like a banner of dignity and resistance. In her clenched hand she held the documents that would prove once and for all the full extent of Villiers' crimes. The gathered crowd formed a semicircle, watching with tense anticipation. Charlotte, her face pale but her gaze firm, stepped forward first. "I saw the Marquis conspiring in secret," she declared, her voice steady and loud enough to rise above the crowd's anxious murmurs. "I heard his words of treason." Colette, trembling but brave, stood from the crowd. "I delivered documents to the authorities, proof of his secret pacts with France's enemies," she said, her voice growing stronger with every word. De la Tour, still pale from his recent wound and supported by 2 loyal soldiers, spoke with the authority of a man who had seen the battlefield and the cost of betrayal. "This man," he said, pointing to Villiers, who now cowered like a shadow of himself, "sacrificed the good of France for his own ambition. He traded lives as if they were cattle. He betrayed the crown and the people." Finally, Madeleine stepped forward, always careful with her words, like a chess master playing kings and courtiers. She approached Genevieve and with a respectful gesture added, "Every move, every secret alliance, every life lost was part of a calculated scheme to elevate the name of Villiers at the cost of countless others." Cornered, the Marquis tried to rise, tried to speak, but his protest died in a throat dry as sand. No word could save him now. Genevieve stepped forward. She raised the documents, holding them high before the people, and spoke with the voice of someone carrying not only her own pain, but the pain of an entire nation. "This is Villiers' legacy," she declared, "not of nobility, not of service to the king, but of betrayal and shame." The crowd erupted in a thunderous outcry. Some raised torches into the air, others wept with relief, still others slammed their tools against the ground in a rhythmic roar of approval. At Grimaud's signal, the order was given. Villiers was shackled on the spot, under the watchful eyes of a people who, for the first time in decades, saw justice not handed down from Versailles grand halls, but demanded by those with the courage to insist on dignity. The news reached the king that very afternoon. Weakened, pressured by his advisors, and fearing a popular revolt, the monarch consented, not out of a sudden sense of righteousness, but because he understood with the cold clarity of rulers who govern through fear, that yielding was the only way to preserve what remained of his power. As the sun began to set, painting the sky a somber red, Chateau Montclair became a symbol of something new. Not just the fall of a corrupt marquis, but the quiet rise of a new hope, built with blood, courage, and tears. Genevieve, standing in the courtyard, gazed past the gates toward the horizon. She knew the fight was far from over. She knew the wounds would take time to heal. But for the first time in a long time, she tasted the rare, forgotten sweetness of victory. And in that moment, beneath the roar of the crowd and the wind that carried with it the cries of a new era, she vowed to honor every life lost, every love sacrificed, every hope reborn. Because on that sacred ground where so many had fallen, she, Genevieve de Montclair, would remain standing. Spring crept over Versailles with the same delicacy as a lover whispering forbidden words. The scent of newly blossomed flowers mingled with the faded perfume of old tapestries and corridors that had long sheltered secrets and betrayals. But that night it wasn't the season's renewal that occupied the court's thoughts, it was the summons to the ball. A brief invitation, almost a veiled command, spread through the golden halls. A ball would be held in the Hall of Mirrors, to mark the end of an era and, silently, the beginning of another. The nobles arrived in heavy carriages, dressed in their finest garments, as if through opulence they could conceal the decay already seeping through the cracks of the old order. The music echoed, soft and distant, as though afraid to disturb the ghosts drifting among marble columns and glittering chandeliers. Genevieve de Montclair arrived without fanfare. Her gown of pearl-gray silk seemed to catch and reflect every beam of light, rendering her ethereal, almost untouchable. A simple necklace of emeralds adorned her neck, and in her finely braided hair rested a single white rose. Each step she took was a silent declaration that though the world had tried to destroy her, she had risen more sovereign than ever. The murmurs began as soon as she crossed the threshold. Nobles bowed their heads, some with genuine respect, others with fear, many with envy. Genevieve walked as though the hall belonged to her, as though the walls, the chandeliers, and the mirrors acknowledged her presence as something inevitable. Madeleine de Brissac, leaning discreetly against one of the great marble columns, watched with sharp eyes, her lips curled into an enigmatic smile as she witnessed her friend command the room without uttering a single word. Lucian Ashford was there too. He wore a black suit with subtle silver trim, elegant and solemn. The glance he cast at Genevieve cut through the space between them like a silent current, charged with everything that could not be said on this night of broken masks and exposed truths. The orchestra began a slow waltz. For a moment, the room hesitated, as if time itself waited for permission to move forward. Lucian crossed the hall with deliberate steps. Ignoring the scandalized and curious stares, he stopped before Genevieve and, without a word, extended his hand. The world seemed to hold its breath. Genevieve, after a moment that stretched into eternity, placed her hand in his. The dance began. Their movements were flawless, fluid, but it was in the silence between the steps that their true conversation unfolded. Every glance, every brush of hands, every restrained closeness spoke of longing, of regret, of impossible promises. The music, sweet and melancholy, cradled them like two survivors who, despite everything, still found refuge in one another. At the edge of the hall, Madeleine watched with eyes glistening from an emotion she would never allow to spill. She approached Genevieve discreetly as the music ended, and passing beside her, whispered with a smile that seemed to carry centuries of wisdom and resignation, "Paris never forgets its dangerous lovers." Then she slipped away, vanishing into the crowd like an elegant shadow. Elsewhere in the room, Colette and Benoit exchanged knowing glances. There was no place left for them among Versailles' golden walls and schemes. Without fanfare, with the quiet resolve of those who understand the true value of choice, they left the ball before dawn. They would go together, far from masks and betrayals, in search of a life where love could be lived without fear. Charlotte de Brissac stood at a crossroads of emotion. Months of mourning, disillusionment, and growth had transformed her. She was no longer the naive girl who dreamed of fairy tales. In her eyes now shone the quiet light of resolve. Soon, she would open her own literary salon in Paris, a refuge for dangerous ideas and revolutionary words. There, knowledge and freedom would flourish like never before. The night wore on, and the Hall of Mirrors grew emptier, as if only restless souls remained, unwilling to leave behind the remnants of a time now fading. Genevieve stood before one of the massive mirrors, gazing not at her reflection, but at the possibilities opening before her. She felt the weight of loss, of sacrifice, but also the strange lightness of one who, having lost everything, is free to rebuild herself from the ruins. Lucian approached one last time. There were no eternal vows, no promises of a certain future. Only a touch of hands, a gaze that said more than any speech, and the silent certainty that as long as they lived, they would remain somehow bound, despite the choices that duty and destiny had forced upon them. When Genevieve left the hall, beneath the first light of dawn, she carried not the bitterness of defeat, but the quiet strength of someone who knows her worth. The last ball at Versailles was not a thunderous triumph, but a solemn whisper of resistance. And in the hearts of those who dared to defy the cruel course of history, the seed of a new world had already begun to bloom, silent, relentless, eternal. 5 years had passed since the events that had shaped the lives of Genevieve de Montclair, Lucien Ashford, and all those who had wandered through the shadows of intrigue and passion at the court of Versailles. Time, as always, had brought both healing and the marks of their choices. The scene that had once been a stage for mysteries and confrontations, for forbidden loves and broken alliances, now found itself in a quiet calm, but one that was deep in transformation. The Château de Montclair, now restored and bathed in the soft light of spring, sheltered not the echoes of past struggles, but the warmth of a new life, forged from the ashes of what had been lost. Genevieve, 5 years later, was a different woman. Her face, still youthful and graceful, retained the unshakable strength that had always defined her, but her eyes, now calmer, carried a lightness that seemed to contradict everything she had been through. Yet there was something in her expression that could not be ignored, a sense of peace earned through much sacrifice. Lucien stood by her side, and though the years had brought the wear of a shared life with its joys and challenges, the flame that had once bound them remained, now deeper and quieter. The love that had once been surrounded by uncertainties and challenges was now a fulfilled promise, sealed in mutual glances, in the simple exchanges that held more meaning than words could express. They had children, 2 in fact. The eldest, Alexander, now 4 years old, had the same dark, deep eyes as Lucien, but the calm, determined demeanor of Genevieve. Little Clara, 2 years old, already displayed her mother's vivacity. With brown hair and small hands, always seeking something new to explore, the house of Montclair, once somber and marked by loss, was now filled with the laughter of children, the sound of hurried footsteps echoing through the halls, and the constant rhythm of daily life. Genevieve looked at her children with a serene smile. Knowing that the future she had longed for them was now being realized, she thought of how, during those uncertain times, she could never have imagined that love and hope would survive the passage of time. Her life, once marked by so many shadows, now faded under the light of what she had built with Lucien and with her own courage. However, time does not erase scars, and there was a price that the characters paid for their choices, even though freedom and happiness filled their lives. Madeleine de Brissac, who had once watched over Genevieve so carefully, now traveled frequently between Paris and Montclair, helping the family maintain dignity and order. She, however, had paid a heavy emotional price. The love she had once felt for Villiers, the one who had shown himself no more than a traitor, had left her with deep scars. The weight of regret still followed her, but she had learned to live with it. Madeleine no longer had illusions, but her view of the world had become more realistic, more focused on truth. Captain de la Tour, now on a diplomatic mission for the crown, had distanced himself from Versailles and the political drama that once ensnared him. Although he had become a valuable ally, the scars he carried were deep. With each mission, each new involvement with the court, he carried the weight of the sacrifice made by Genevieve and Lucien. And he knew that his own fate, like everyone's, had been shaped by the choices he had made. In his letters to Genevieve, he often spoke of France's future, of the changes in the country, but always with a nostalgia disguised as professionalism. He knew, deep down, that what he most wanted was to have stayed by her side, by Lucien's side, but destiny had already charted his course. Colette, meanwhile, now lived discreetly in Paris, with Benoit by her side. Together, they had become quiet defenders of a new political order, but they never forgot the horrors they had witnessed during the court's intrigues. They cared for others, carrying out their own secret missions, but always with the same silent, unwavering love that bound them. The fight for justice never ceased for them, and the love for truth and freedom became the cornerstone of their lives. And finally, Villiers, who had once been the archetype of power, manipulation, and betrayal, had disappeared into the shadows of history. His name had been erased, like the last breath before a storm. Those who followed him fell with him. His ambition, his power games, his alliances with the lowest of interests had cost him everything. The court of Versailles, once the stage of his victories, now stood on the silence of his absence. Genevieve, however, knew that his fall was not the fall of a man, but the fall of a symbol of an era that was coming to an end. As Genevieve walked through the gardens of Montclair with Lucien, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin and the scent of flowers around her, she knew that the future, though still uncertain, was finally in her hands. The pain and the struggle had given way to peace and growth. The love that had once almost been lost in the shadows of politics and ambitions now flourished in a solid way. A love that had endured the passage of time, the war, the pain, and the separation. Genevieve looked toward the horizon, where the sun was slowly setting, bathing the world in a soft golden light. She knew that the winds of the past could never be wiped away, but no matter how, the echoes of the court still resonated in her memory. What mattered now was the new life she and Lucien had built, A life with purpose, with love, and above all, with the promise of a tomorrow where their children could grow up far from the shadows of what once was. And there, in the softness of that evening, Genevieve smiled, not as the Duchess of Montclair who had known the weight of loss and betrayal, but as the woman who finally had found her place in the world by Lucien's side with their children, and with the certainty that despite everything, life and love had triumphed. The game of intrigue, of pain and loss, had come to an end, and now the stage was set for the true promise, the promise of love, of the future, and of freedom. And in the quiet of that night, Genevieve knew that despite all the trials, she and Lucien had achieved the impossible. In the end, it was not the end at all, but only the beginning. And so, the story of Genevieve de Montclair and Lucien Ashford comes to an end, a journey marked by secrets, intrigue, and above all, the immeasurable strength of love. They have shown us that even in the face of the greatest adversities, the courage to move forward and the commitment to our own values can lead us to victory. The path is not always easy, and choices often require painful sacrifices, but the reward lies in the small daily victories, the freedom we gain, and most importantly, the love we manage to preserve along the way. This tale of resilience, passion, and overcoming reminds us that no matter how much fate tries to steer us off course, it's always possible to rebuild, to start anew, and most importantly, to move forward with hope. The greatest battles aren't fought on battlefields, but in our hearts. What makes a story truly epic isn't just the clash of forces, but the ability to transform pain into learning and fear into courage. Now, I invite you to reflect on what touched your heart most in this narrative. What did you learn from the challenges faced by Genevieve and Lucien? What lessons will you carry with you from this journey? Leave your comment below and share with us what resonated the most with you. I'd love to know your impressions and how this story may have touched your soul. And to show us you made it to the end, please write the word rebirth in the comments. This helps us see who followed the story all the way through, and of course, helps spread this journey to others who are also seeking inspiring stories about fighting, loving, and overcoming any obstacle. Also, feel free to check out other similar narratives we're sharing. They're filled with emotion, lessons, and of course, major twists. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, remember, true power comes from within. Never stop believing in yourself, for you are capable of turning any obstacle into a story of success.